You are watching Breakthrough News, and this is the Freedom Side live. In fact, I am one of your hosts, Eugene Perrier, here as always, alongside my intrepid co-host, Rania Khalek. Rania, great to be back with you.
Great to be back on with you, Eugene, live streaming for the second time this week.
Oh my gosh, you're right. We did live stream earlier this week. It feels like it's been longer than that. A lot of news happening in the world, but of course, if you missed it, you could see I was a guest on a live edition of Rania Khalek's Dispatches, or Dispatches with Rania Khalek, if you prefer, on the situation in Niger. So you can go check that out where you are right now on YouTube. Check under the live tab, because it was live. That's where you will find it. It's also being promoted as well on our social media at BT Newsroom, but you're on YouTube, so you can see it after this show, of course. Do not leave this stream to go watch it, even though I know
don't do that. Don't do that. Stay here, and when you're done here, then go watch it.
The important thing is, if you had subscribed to our YouTube channel previously and hit the bell so you got the alerts, you already would have seen this, because it would have come to you across your computer somehow, some way. And for many of you, that's probably the case. But for those of you who have not yet done so, please, if you would, hit that subscribe button. Then hit the bell so you get the alerts to the thing that you subscribe to, so that you can follow all of our fantastic content, like Rania's interviews on Dispatches and many, many other things that we are doing here, including this show. So subscribe, hit the bell. And Rania, what else should individuals do?
Well, Eugene, that's a fantastic question. For those who are watching, please do make sure that you hit the like button, because it helps us in the algorithm. But also, you can support our show materially by becoming a patron at patreon.com/breakthrough news, where you can access exclusive content, including parts of my show Dispatches, as well as Eugene's monthly seminar on Africa, as well as, if I'm not mistaken, certain merchandise. Eugene, is that correct? Do you want to show them?
Don't want to spill this. Do it correctly.
Yeah, be very careful.
We have our mug here.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Look at that color. I love it. It's like, you feel like Vanna White right now?
Yep. In a way. I feel slightly less successful than her, but nonetheless, similar to the Wheel of Fortune, you can indeed get something here. Though, unlike the Wheel of Fortune, it's not a game of chance. You will definitely get that mug if you go to patreon.com/breakthrough news and become a patron. At a certain level, you will, of course, see that when you go there to patreon.com. So that's patreon.com/breakthrough news if you want to do that. And of course, we are here. We are live. We've got a great show for you today. We'll be swinging around from, Iran to striking Amazon workers to the new McCarthyism and more. And we'll be starting in just a bit with some of our first guests, but I wanted to say that to let you know this is now the time to sound the alarm. Well, I don't know, maybe don't do that. But, air horn, yell, something. Don't pull a fire alarm or anything of that nature that could be dangerous for people. But do something, loud or persuasive to let people know that we are here and we are live. We want whoever is following you to be following us. And, Rania, I'll just say briefly, since you brought it up, before we turn to our first guest, there were some updates in Niger today, or related to Niger and Abuja, Nigeria. The ECOWAS, or some members of ECOWAS, met there in Nigeria to discuss what they were going to do. Not a lot came out of the meeting from my perspective. They did say that they had a standby force, but that they were going to try to exhaust all avenues of diplomacy, I believe was the phrase the president of Nigeria mentioned. And of course, the United States and the EU still backing up ECOWAS. I believe the EU has just leveled sanctions on Niger. So ongoing issue here. Unclear, Rania, if there's going to be a intervention, but the prime minister, I believe it was the prime minister of Mali, noted the impact of the war in Libya and said if there was an intervention in Niger, it could cause maybe 30 years of massive instability. But we want to turn to our first guest and our first story here, and that is the murder by Minnesota State Troopers of Ricky Cobb II. And we are very honored to be joined here on the show once again by Michelle Gross, who's the president of Communities Against Police Brutality there in the Twin Cities area. Michelle, as always, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me today. Hopefully you folks can hear me okay.
Yes, we can definitely hear you, and we are honored to have you. And maybe just to start, because this has gotten some press, but maybe not that much. For those who haven't heard, I mean, what took place, or what do we know at least, vis-a-vis these state troopers having killed Mr. Cobb?
Well, it looks like the state troopers pulled Mr. Cobb over ostensibly for an equipment violation. They claimed that his taillights were out. It looks like they were lying about that, basically. But in essence, they pulled him over, and then they kind of manufactured a reason to try to force him out of the vehicle. And he was talking to a state trooper on the driver's side. And the state trooper was saying, you need to get out of your vehicle, and, was kind of talking to him when a different state trooper came up on the passenger side, approached him right away with his gun drawn, put the gun right in his face, essentially. And we should be really clear that Mr. Cobb was never armed. He presented no threats of any kind, life-threatening or any otherwise, to either of the state troopers. And suddenly that state trooper on the passenger side opened fire on Mr. Cobb and shot him. And not only did he kill Mr. Cobb, but he also shot in the direction of his partner state troopers. They were in the line of fire as well. So it was really, sometimes you get these things where they can try to say it's justified, or they can, sort of use different reasons. This one was so blatantly not justified that people are really upset, and they should be. It's really an appalling situation. The police later tried to claim that he was not wanted on a warrant or any such thing, but that they had wanted to talk to him about some possible kind of domestic situation or something. But the reality is that those are not the basis for pulling somebody over, and there was no legal basis even to ask him to step out of the vehicle.
Yeah, it's really horrific. And also, of course, this took place in the same, city where George Floyd was killed by police. So I'm just curious, what does this mean about any changes, if there have been any, and whether they matter in a place like Minneapolis, if this is continuing to take place where police, killed another unarmed person, seemingly without any cause. And once again, another family has lost a father, a husband, a loved one.
Exactly. And, that's the thing. We are in a pitched battle here to try to make the police behave in a constitutional manner. It's notable that this is the state troopers. So that's the state police agency that did this. And they have a very nasty history of engaging in like high-speed chases that they don't call off. And in fact, they were involved in a high-speed chase just a few weeks prior that killed 5 people. And so, that kind of thing. And so they're very hard to hold accountable. And worst of all, our police department, I should say rather, our state relies on the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, which is like sort of the state's version of the FBI, to investigate these cases. And the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, or what we call the BCA, is actually part of the same state agency that the state troopers are part of. So essentially, you've got an agency investigating itself. So we're not expecting to have a substantial or realistic or neutral type of investigation. We know that the BCA does a really poor job of investigating police cases anyway. The investigations are designed to clear the cops, and now we've got them investigating yet another part of their same agency. So we're not looking for any kind of a outcome from those people whatsoever, that kind of thing. But you're right, it's a real pitched battle to get justice. The day that Ricky Cobb was killed is the same day that we won a lawsuit for the mother of Cordell Handy, who was murdered by the St. Paul police. And we won her an $11.5 million judgment, the largest by far that St. Paul has ever paid out, the previous largest judgment being $2 million. So, there's all of these efforts in the courts to try to hold these cops accountable, and yet they don't get criminal charges. It's questionable whether these cops that murdered, or this particular cop that murdered Ricky Cobb, is going to ever see justice. So it's just an ongoing effort here to fight the cover-ups and to bring real change.
It's such an important point, and I'm also even go back to what you were saying to my first question. I think it's so important to understand some of these details, that he was not armed, that these other people. I mean, you hate to even have to say this, but I feel like some of why this is such an uphill battle is there's so much disinformation put out in all these circumstances. I mean, before I actually saw the circumstances of Mr. Cobb's death, I saw the tweet thread from Representative Dean Phillips, which is, about police violence in general, but he talks about the importance of understanding the fear of an officer approaching a car with a felon who may be armed. So I thought, when I started looking up the case, I said, I thought that was the details, actually.
Right.
And then when they weren't, I was like, oh, wow, that's shocking. But, he's an important person, well-known representative. I actually met him in Minneapolis once at a press conference of Families of Police Brutality right after George Floyd was killed, in which he said, I want to do better. And it just seems like these kind of comments are exactly the type of thing that create problems when it's sort of portraying the idea that when police kill someone, it's like one of these close-run situations. Like, it's unfortunate, but the person was also maybe a bad person.
Right. That's the framing they always do, because they need some way to cover for these police. But I think you're exactly right that, we've got an elected official, who's supposed to be responsible to the community, over here mouthing this, the fear of the police type stuff. Okay, if you're so damn fearful, excuse my language, but if you're so fearful of these kinds of encounters, don't pull these people over for nonsense. This was a pretextual stop. They thought, here's a guy driving. Let's pull him over. Let's see if we can find something. It was a pretextual stop with no good reasons. And if you're so fearful of it, stop doing those pretextual stops. In Minneapolis, we've got 2 consent decrees going on. One with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights and the other with the Department of Justice. That one hasn't been finalized, but we've got these, consent decrees, and one of them, the state consent decree actually prohibits police from having from doing pretextual stops. This needs to happen throughout the whole state. We need to stop this practice.
Another element of this that's interesting is that there was dashcam footage that was released that, of course, did show that the police didn't have any reason to shoot this person. And the reason I raise that is because I remember maybe like a decade ago, or even less, oftentimes the idea of the dashcam was used to say, oh, yes, like this is what's going to help, keep police in line. They're going to be less likely to shoot and kill people without provocation and less likely to abuse people. But time after time, it seems like in a lot of these instances where police are shooting and killing unharmed people around the country, there is dashcam footage that actually confirms what the families of the victims or the victims themselves, if they survive, are saying happened. So I'm just curious what you have to say about, the idea of the dash cam being able to be a tool in reforming police behavior in America.
Well, dash cams and body-worn cams are some good evidence that we can acquire. I know that there's efforts in some states to actually prohibit people from having access to that information. We luckily are in a state where that kind of information is available, and we have sued multiple times to get access to it. In this particular case, they released the footage, but they didn't release all the footage. They released selected portions of the footage. And what we looked at when we examined the footage in detail is that they actually cut out 8 frames of the footage that showed some of the more important information. And particularly when you listen to and look at the video, what you'll notice is you never hear the gunshots because they eliminated that footage. And so, the information is valuable to the community, but only to the extent that we can access it. And to the extent that the police control access to that information, that's what's harmful to the community. If you think what you did was so right, release it all. Just release all of it and make it all available to all of us and let us be the judges. But, they want to carefully curate their stories. You'll recall that the Minneapolis police actually stood on the sidewalk outside of City Hall and said that George Floyd died from a medical emergency. While in the meantime, all of us are looking at the community footage that showed the real story. So we see this all the time in policing, where there's a carefully crafted and carefully narrated version that's put out to try to give the police officers, some chance to cover for what they've done. And as long as they control the data, it's always going to be that way.
Well, I'm glad you raised that issue because, and especially this being a state police case, I think maybe raises this. I mean, is there something that the Minnesota state legislature needs to do? I mean, I certainly, know that they're getting a lot of credit for doing a lot of progressive things in their last session. Are there things they can do to address some of these issues more substantively?
Absolutely, absolutely, and I smiled to myself when you said that because, we've got 8 bills that we've had at the legislature for the last 4 years that they haven't barely touched. They did finally pass last year the one of my bills, which was the ban on no-knock warrants, although it's not a total ban, it's a substantial ban. So that's been a real battle for the last 4 years. But there are other things we need them to do. Particularly, we want to create an independent investigatory body that will make decisions about prosecutions, and actually do the investigations. We've got to take this out of the realm of the cops investigating the cops. This has to get away from that. We also want to create a mechanism where people have pretty much instantaneous access to all of the footage, unedited, at least the families have access to that footage within 24 hours. And that's a bill that we've had at the legislature for 4 years. And really, finally, the most important thing is to end qualified immunity. Qualified immunity is what protects cops who, pretend like they somehow didn't know that it was wrong to murder somebody. And we, unfortunately, people who should get justice don't get it because of qualified immunity. So we've got to end qualified immunity, both at the state level and at the federal level. And so those are all things that we're working on to try to get to happen.
So in this particular case, what happens next? You mentioned the police investigating themselves. Then what happens? I you can't predict exactly how it's going to go down, but I assume there is a typical way things tend to move. And then let's say the police investigate themselves and they clear themselves. Then what are the options in terms of being able to get justice for this family?
Sure. So here's the situation. We have a new progressive, county attorney who would be the one making the prosecutory decisions. She's done this whole song and dance number, though, despite the fact that she's, supposedly better than what we had before. She's done a whole song and dance number about, we have to wait for the BCA to finish their investigation, even though we've raised that these people are not neutral and they're investigating themselves. It's completely inappropriate. But she's towing the party line, basically. And then the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension will take 6 or 9 months to, do a quasi investigation that's got a certain design. And then they'll come back. And if it's anything like that's always happened before, there will be no charges. Now, contrast this with, let's say that there is a community violence situation that happens where, somebody kills somebody else and there's video footage of it. They wouldn't hesitate to bring charges. Why are we acting like this is some kind of a special situation because it's cops? If somebody kills somebody and they weren't supposed to, let's bring some charges. And you know what? They'll get their day in court. I'm not saying let's not have a day in court. We all say that they should have the day in court, but let's actually have that day in court, not just wait around for some phony investigation. And, 9 months or a year after everybody's calmed down, then they'll come out with a little quiet press release and say, well, we didn't think we could prove the case against them and blah, 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 blah. And that'll be the typical thing that'll happen in this case as well, which is frankly sickening, and it shouldn't be allowed to happen.
Mm-hmm. Michelle, before we let you go, where can people find Communities Against Police Brutality if they want to support your work?
Sure. Communities United Against Police Brutality is on the internet. We've got www.cuapb.org. We are on Facebook, all over the place on Facebook, on social media. People just need to reach out to support our work and also to learn more about police brutality. Our website is packed with information about how people can end police brutality. Lots and lots of ideas and lots of ways to get involved.
Mm-hmm. Michelle Gross, president of Communities United Against Police Brutality, thank you so much for giving us some of your time here in the Freedom Side.
Great. Thank you for having me today.
Mm-hmm. Well, again and again, we know about 1,000 people are killed every year by the police in the United States, and most of them, it seems, there's no justice, and they tend to be heavily unjustified. Oh,
indeed. And of course, the number keeps going up. And the roots of it are important to remember because it's like a system. It's not a city problem. It's not just Minneapolis, right? It's everywhere around the country, big and small police departments. It's a cultural capitalist problem that we've talked about a lot on the show, but it's still good to shine a light on these specific cases because these are actual people whose families are devastated. They just like lost a father. I mean, it's just, it just keeps happening over and over and over again.
And it's on tape.
And I'm happy. And it's
Which
on
is
tape.
like,
Exactly.
imagine if you're a family member to have to then live with that. But yeah, really unbelievable situation. I know the family's in a closed door meeting with Governor Tim Walz today. Don't know what he's going to say, promise, or do. But of course, Keith Ellison is the attorney general there. So a lot of people who masquerade as progressives at the very least. And I know all the progressive activists and organizations in D.C. were saying, oh, Minnesota, most progressive legislature. So let's see what they really do, now that the chips are down on this issue. And as Michelle said, they're stalling on a number of bills. But nonetheless, we'll keep following that story. We'll keep following other stories. Of course, also one of the officers who kept the crowd away during the killing of George Floyd was recently just convicted this week, too. So anyway, we will continue to talk about police terrorism all across the United States. But we're going to turn now to the Persian Gulf, where tensions between the U.S. and Iran, well, the U.S. is raising the tensions between the U.S. and Iran, I think is the better way to say it, with new deployments there. But before I editorialize too much, let's bring in our guest. We are honored to be joined here once again by Giorgio Cafiero, who is the CEO of Gulf State Analytics. Giorgio, thanks so much for being with us.
Good to be with you guys.
Well, really, really happy to have you. And maybe just explain for our audience, what's going on. I mean, the U.S. is, people probably seen they're deploying some thousands of troops, but I think that's probably what most people have seen, just the headlines. So, what exactly are they doing and why are they at least claiming they're doing it?
Well, recently there have been many cases in which the Iranians have been, seizing or at least harassing a number of vessels and tankers. This causes disruptions to global shipping. It's a big concern for the United States. It's a big concern for many countries, such as those in the Gulf Cooperation Council. And I think the U.S. is trying to sort of flex its military muscles near Iran and to try to establish some sort of deterrence. But I think it's important to see this in kind of a wider context. It's not like the Iranians just woke up one day and thought it would be really fun to start harassing vessels. The United States pulled out of the JCPOA in May 2018, imposed unilateral sanctions on Iran, and there have been episodes whereby the U.S. has actually been taking these oil tankers that belong to Iran. Obviously, from Iran's perspective, this is just straight up piracy. I think probably if any other country were doing what the U.S. is doing, Washington would consider that to be piracy. So this is really sort of a tit for tat situation. And the Iranians have obviously been lashing out. And now the U.S. is definitely sort of ratcheting things up. And I think the stakes are now quite a bit higher. And there's even talk about the U.S. putting armed forces on commercial vessels in regional waters. That's certainly going to elicit some sort of a response from Iran. Definitely a dangerous situation in the Gulf right now.
Yeah, I mean, those are all really good points. And I appreciate that you mentioned that the U.S. has essentially been confiscating Iranian oil, like in a piracy-like manner. And I believe even selling that oil and making a profit off of it. But that's been going on for the last couple of years. And of course, Iran has been responding in the way that it has been. But I guess maybe this was naive of me to think, but I had assumed that perhaps the deal that was brokered by China between Iran and Saudi Arabia would have lessened detentions. I know this is the U.S. we're talking about, but I'm just curious if that deal having taken place in the backdrop of all this is playing any sort of role in, I guess, keeping things like at a not so escalated pace, if that makes sense, in terms of like our U.S. allies in the region, because of that deal, less likely to join in pushing as hard as the U.S. is right now.
I'm so glad you asked the question because the China factor is extremely important here. I think that one of the main motivations the Biden administration has for, beefing up the U.S. military presence in these waters has to do with Washington's concerns about the extent to which Saudi Arabia has been moving a lot closer to China. I think the Biden administration is trying to send a message to Riyadh that China is not going to be able to provide security for the kingdom in the ways the U.S. has. The U.S. is just sort of instinctively pro-Saudi, anti-Iranian, which is not the way China conducts its foreign policy. So I think the Biden administration is trying to convince Saudi Arabia that the U.S. is a special partner, not one that China can replace. And at the same time, when we're talking about Saudi Arabia and China, and also other Arab states and China moving toward doing trade in non-dollar currencies, also talking about partnerships between the kingdom and Chinese technology companies such as Huawei, and also the support that Beijing has given Saudi Arabia when it comes to Saudi Arabia's work on its own ballistic missile program. There are many dimensions to the Saudi-China relationship that the Biden administration is concerned about. I think what is a concern further down the road is the possibility, this won't happen anytime soon, but who knows, 10, 15 years down the road when the Chinese might set up a military base in Saudi Arabia. So I think what the Biden administration is trying to do right now is pull the kingdom and also the UAE away from China and send a message to these countries that the U.S. is very committed to their security. And maybe we can talk about this later, but this also fits into the White House's quest to bring Saudi Arabia into the Abraham Accords and normalize with Israel.
Well, I think that's a good segue. Maybe we should talk about it now because I think that's an interesting factor. And of course, this has been, from the Trump administration to the Biden administration, almost an obsession in certainly the Middle East, but also all across Africa, this attempt to create this normalization with Israel. So how does it fit in?
Well, I think Biden really wants to be able to bring Saudi Arabia into the Abraham Accords before the U.S. presidential election next year. This would be seen from Biden's perspective and from his supporters as a huge foreign policy win. So I think, that's obviously, we have to consider sort of the domestic politics in play. But every single U.S. administration since the founding of Israel would have always welcomed any time in which any Arab country normalizes with Israel. Clearly, the fact that there were 4 Arab states that normalized with Israel during Trump's time in the White House, set a big precedent. The Biden administration wants to build on that and expand the Abraham Accords further. Given Saudi Arabia's important role in the wider Arab and Islamic worlds, it would be so significant for Saudi Arabia to normalize with Tel Aviv. But the thing is that I think we don't have any reason to expect this, especially with this current government in Israel. There are many people in Washington who are rooting for this to happen, telling us that Saudi Arabia is on the verge of normalizing with Israel. But if you listen to what the Saudi leadership actually says, they've been very clear that they would not make that move unless Israel makes some very serious concessions to the Palestinians. And given this extremely right-wing fanatical government in Israel, that's just simply not on the table. Maybe Saudi Arabia would normalize with Israel down the line, but again, with this current Israeli government, I think we can forget about it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Something else I wanted to ask you about too with relation to Iran in the region, Giorgio, is this, you did recently write about this, and that's this regional diplomacy taking place between the UAE and Iran about a dispute over islands that has been ongoing for decades. But the reason I think it's also relevant to everything else you're discussing is the role of Russia and China in trying to act as mediators in that dispute. Can you talk about the significance of what's taking place there? And I think this again speaks to this increasing mediation role that we're seeing in this increasingly multipolar world, which you and I discussed on my show last month, I think it was, about the role of Russia and particularly China in the region.
Yeah, well, just in case some of your viewers might not be familiar with this dispute, since the 1970s, really since the beginning of the UAE's independence, bringing us back to 1971, there's been a territorial dispute between UAE and Iran. It's over these 3 islands in the Gulf. The Iranian position is that these islands are absolutely 100% Iranian. The UAE maintains that they have sovereignty over these 3 islands. And at times, the Iranians have asserted their control over the islands as a way of sort of whipping up nationalism in Iran. And from the Iranian perspective, the West puts a lot of pressure on the UAE to push on this issue in international forums as a way to sort of intensify pressure on Iran. What happened in December was the Chinese president came to Saudi Arabia, and there was a joint statement between the GCC and China in which the statement called for a diplomatic settlement to this territorial dispute. Iran found that completely unacceptable, viewing that as a challenge to Iran's territorial integrity. Iran summoned the Chinese ambassador to Tehran. Then just last month, Russia put out a joint statement with the GCC, which basically said the same thing, and Iran responded by summoning the Russian ambassador to Tehran. What I think is going on is China and Russia are really trying to conduct balanced foreign policies in the Gulf region. They want to have good relations with Iran, but also have good relations with GCC countries. So this has created a little bit of a challenge for China and Russia. I think some people in Washington possibly exaggerated the extent to which those joint statements caused friction between Iran and Russia, and also Iran and China. But from the UAE's perspective, at least, they saw this as very good, that 2 very significant global powers were putting some degree of pressure on Iran to at least come and negotiate some sort of a diplomatic settlement to this islands dispute. And I'll also just add that earlier this month, the IRGC kicked off these military drills off of one of the island's coasts, this island being Abu Musa, and it was sort of Iran's way of sending a message to GCC states that despite this trend toward renormalization, despite the Iranian-Saudi agreement from March, and despite the fact that the UAE sent its ambassador back to Iran last year, Iran is not going to budge when it comes to defending territory that the Iranian government sees as 100% Iranian.
Mm-hmm. Well, interesting backdrop to the whole thing, especially when you think, these U.S. ships, the Bataan and the Carter Hall, an amphibious assault ship and a dock landing ship, exactly what you might need if you wanted to make someone think you might invade an island and take it over. But I guess there's sort of a deeper underlying aspect of all of this is whether these military buildups that are framed as security are really that. I mean, it seems the U.S. has been building up for some time. They've been claiming they're countering Iran, but Iran doesn't seem terribly deterred by that. In fact, it seems to be that this kind of tit for tat just drives kind of an arms race mentality, which doesn't, at least from my perspective, seem to be making anyone safer. So it feels like there's also kind of like a logical perspective here that the idea that's presented, from the United States point of view is more troops, more sailors, more soldiers, whatever, the more likely the other side will back down. But it seems like that's not really how the other side is reacting.
Yeah, I agree with you. And just recently, Iranian state media announced that the country now has technology for supersonic cruise missiles. That means they can travel at the speed of at least Mach 1, and Iran has never had that military technology before. How soon the Iranian military will have those missiles, I don't know. But what this tells us is that Iran is not backing down. And going back to what happened with the Trump administration, pulling out of the JCPOA and then imposing maximum pressure, the thought was that these sanctions and this pressure and this intimidation was going to get Iran to come down on its knees. That definitely hasn't happened. Iran has continued to, engage in its sort of ballistic missile activity. It's still supporting groups in the region that the U.S., Israel, and some other regional states view as terrorist organizations. The Iranian nuclear program continues to advance. So I certainly agree that maximum pressure has not achieved its goals. And I think that the Arab countries in the Gulf realized that maximum pressure did not make them any safer. They weren't any more secure because of the Trump administration's policies toward Iran, which quite frankly the Biden administration has in many ways continued. And so while the U.S. is further militarizing regional waters, this kind of goes against this trend we're seeing whereby the Saudis, the Emiratis, and others in the region are trying to reconcile with Iran and sort of lower the temperatures. They see their security being advanced through more diplomacy, and this really, says that they're pursuing an agenda that's kind of going against what the Biden administration seems to be doing in the Gulf.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, one thing I would just want to I know we're wrapping here, but one last thing I just want to ask you about is, as we unfortunately have another presidential election season upon us and we start talking about a horse race, I mean, it does seem like when it comes to Iran, it doesn't really matter at times. It does to some degree, right? You had the JCPOA under Obama, but under Biden, like you just said, the policy of Trump has continued. So what, can we expect if we have a change in presidency, or if we don't? Does this policy, do you think, remain the same, or will there be a difference? Are we more likely to have a war under one party versus another?
I think probably a Republican would be a little more hawkish and more aggressive toward Iran. We did point out that many of the fundamental aspects of Trump's Iran policies have stayed in place under Biden, but there has been some degree of diplomatic engagement, some concessions. I think Biden has been a little softer on Iran than Trump, and I would think probably a Republican would be much more aggressive, not only in policies, but also sort of tone. And I think probably this is something we could say about really any of the Republicans who are running right now. I mean, just look at the tweets that Nikki Haley puts out when she talks about Iran. I mean, it's very, very dangerous rhetoric, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I hear you. There's a crusader aspect to the whole thing, but that's another segment for another time. Giorgio Cafiero, who is the CEO of Gulf State Analytics, thank you so much for joining us here on the freedom side. I guess we dropped our friend Giorgio sooner than we thought here, but thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Shapeshifter.
Search
Giorgio's
his name,
a
Giorgio's name, and look for him. He's doing a lot of writing across many different platforms about issues happening in the Middle East. We have you back. So I was just saying, you're a great author as well as a great commentator, and telling folks to look for your byline in many different places. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Technological gremlins, as we like to call them, right?
Yes, I like that you stuck with that story for a long time. Definitely gremlins.
Well, I like it. For those who don't know. For those who don't know, actually, I don't even remember, but it's a great way to talk about when technology goes glitchy and the Matrix comes after.
You. Yeah.
Anyways, that was fun.
Yeah, it was. It's from Roald Dahl's first story, Gremlins.
Yes. Before we do move on to the next topic,
Sure.
I do want to berate our audience for a moment, if I may. I do see we have 411 people watching, which is fantastic. However, only 172 of you have clicked the like button. So, as you know, we are an independent media outlet over here. We aren't CNN, so the YouTube algorithm doesn't just automatically boost us into everybody's brains. So please do hit the like button if you're watching right now. If you're one of those 400 people, I'd like to see that number go up. It helps us in the algorithm. It's not just for vanity, you guys. It's also because the more people who like, the more it gets pushed into people's feeds so that more people can see content from independent media that isn't, blasting corporate propaganda points from the State Department. So there you have it. Please click the like button.
Yes, I agree. Please, you should. Well, we are going to move forward here a little bit, and we want to talk about the sort of McCarthyite type attitude that seems to be descending in tandem with the new Cold War. So, what is old is new again. But to discuss this issue, we are very happy to be joined once again by Dr. Ben Becker, who is the editor-in-chief of Breakthrough News. Dr. Ben Becker, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, the pleasure is all ours. really glad you agreed. Sort of very rare that, we can get breakthrough news on breakthrough news.
Always turning
But
us
either
down.
way,
Always turning us
it's,
down.
it feels a little through the looking glass here, especially for those of us who look through history. But I mean, we've got a bipartisan House Select Committee on China and, claiming to be investigating this, that, and the third. You've got Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio in the Senate. You've got Comer in the House, who are every day, it seems, releasing some new letter saying, go after this person or that person. The Daily Beast, the New York Times writing articles. You have the DOJ going after any scientist who ever looked at China on a map somewhere. I mean, it really does feel like we are in a tightening vice in this country in terms of what you're allowed to say and what you're not allowed to say that is related to geopolitics. Should we be concerned?
Yes. I mean, I think it's a very serious matter. Just yesterday, it took another turn when Senator Marco Rubio issued a letter to the Department of Justice calling on the DOJ to initiate investigations into a variety of independent media, peace organizations, progressive organizations, anti-racist groups. This comes 5 days after a similar letter that was targeting quite mainstream major environmental groups, also saying that these too are fronts of China, that these are unregistered foreign agents of China inside the United States. So there is a larger witch hunt that's beginning or that's already begun. It has every indication that it's going to accelerate and draw more and more people into its net, as all witch hunts do historically. And it's a major threat to free speech, because ultimately what is at the heart of this is that political speech, dissidents, people who are opposed to the turn of U.S. foreign policy and military establishment towards confrontation and conflict with China, people who basically say this is a terrible idea and that we should go a different route, are being accused of essentially a thought crime. And therefore, under the sort of in the elite bubble, to have that view means you must be under the employ of a foreign power, because this is, quote unquote, echoing Chinese talking points or amplifying Chinese talking points. Even if you independently, in other words, come to certain conclusions because of your own political viewpoints, your own experience, that's what's happening right now. And it's a major danger for the left, but I think also for anyone who cares about peace, anyone who cares about free speech, anyone who cares about civil liberties. And so the first McCarthyism was a huge blow to free speech in the 1950s. It took 10 years really for that cloud to be lifted. In some ways, it never was lifted. And now that cloud is coming back, and it's an urgent matter that all progressive people, all independent media really unite at this moment to fight back. And I think if we take a step back from it, as you said, it really is at the heart. It's about the new Cold War, that 5 or 6 years ago, it was fine to be friends with China. It was fine to say we should have a reset with Russia. Remember, this was the official policy of the Bush administration, the Obama administration. Now to say the things that were commonplace 5 or 6 years ago makes you a foreign agent today. And so basically the New York Times and other elite media are playing the same role it's always played, which is they wait for their cues from the State Department, from the Pentagon, from Washington to say, even though we were friends with these people a few years ago, these are the new enemies. Now just do your work, go all out to demonize them, to make it basically unacceptable in respectable society, to not go along with it. And that's how we create the ideological consensus for when the war finally does come. And this is preparations for that kind of conflict, and it's just happening in advance. And as usual, the left is often the first one to suffer the blows, because the left is the most sort of consistent anti-war peace voice in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, it is quite outrageous the way you've had these mainstream outlets, with the New York Times most recently attacking actual peace groups. Just literally attacking groups that are calling for no Cold War with China, saying no war. That's literally it. No war becomes a Chinese government talking point. And, they must be influenced by the Chinese government, and essentially advocating that these groups be investigated for advocating against war. But can you talk about the specifics here, Ben? Because I think when a lot of people think of FARA, the Foreign Agents Registration Act, they think of state-funded media, because that's when it was first became popularized in recent years, right? Against, RT, against Press TV, against I believe CGTN as well was forced to register at some point after, the Trump administration came to office and the whole aftermath of like Russiagate hysteria. But we're not talking, I mean, we can talk, that's a different conversation to have about what should be forced to register as a foreign agent. I mean, the Israel lobbying groups that are actively connected to the Israeli government, of course, never are. But what is the Foreign Agents Registration Act, and why is it so dangerous that you have someone like Marco Rubio, like basically invoking that and saying that we should have the DOJ investigate peace groups and media outlets that are, independent of any foreign government?
Right. I mean, the Pharah Law comes really out of the 1930s at the height of Nazism. And it was initially conceived of as a law to basically keep the Nazis from influencing U.S. public opinion. This was at a time, by the way, when, supporters of Nazism could fill up Madison Square Garden. There was quite a significant sort of far-right movement inside the United States. And so that's how the law went through. But we're in a very different moment from 1938, I'd say. The law is written with a lot of vagueness and a lot of sort of broad interpretive powers for law enforcement so that they can do exactly what you're saying, which is to politically and selectively decide who they want to characterize as a foreign agent. And the crazy thing about this law is that it's not just actually about a foreign government. It's actually if you are representing or sort of under the direction of any foreign entity. And it doesn't even make clear what that is. In other words, you could be the foreign entity of a corporation, of an organization, of a NGO in another country. If you're employed by the subsidiary of another foreign entity, I mean, all these things, technically, they could try to say this makes you a foreign agent, which of course sounds like you're a spy or something, but because the word is very evocative. But it's written so that basically they can go after whoever they want to go after and say you're a foreign agent, but they don't really have a lot of technical guidance about what that actually means. I'd be for the abolition of the law altogether. I think there's more than enough, legal stuff out there to protect against espionage. But this is really just a law that's sort of a plaything for whoever controls Congress at any given moment or controls the Department of Justice to then initiate investigations against their political enemies. To show you how broad this is, there's a case of a hotel worker in Boston. His name is Henry Liang, very well-known community activist in the Chinese community there. He's for peace with China. He's for reunification between the mainland and Taiwan. He does local activism. Everybody knows him. He's a hotel worker, as I said. And the fact that he has a friend and in the Chinese consulate in Boston that he communicates with, which is not a crime. Many U.S. policymakers, business leaders, people communicate with foreign governments all the time. But they've seized his phone, and the fact that his friend in the consulate would ask him a question like how many people came to this protest or little things like that. And the fact that he responds, now he's taking the direction of a foreign power. And he actually got arrested under Pharah as being an unregistered foreign agent. Here he's a hotel worker who's not providing anything that's not already publicly known. This is public information. He's talking about things that are happening in his life, in his political activity. And yet that's being sort of painted in the mainstream media by the DOJ as this grand espionage case. And so that's just a good example of this kind of selectivity as we're talking about. It's not even selectivity because that makes it sound like he's doing something wrong, but it's really about its political weaponization. As you said, AIPAC is not registered as a foreign agent. There's all these mainstream think tanks that receive hundreds of thousands of dollars from Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and these are U.S. allies. And then they write reports that then influence U.S. public opinion on those very countries, and yet they're never asked to register as foreign agents. So it really depends on who the enemy is at a given moment that's been declared in Washington, and then they drag out the law to basically target whoever they want domestically. They've also went after the African People's Socialist Party the same way.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's such a good point, and I'm glad you mentioned the African People's Socialist Party as well. Just another one of these many cases, and it's ironic. I mean, anyone who knows anything about the sort of DC social scene amongst the elites, a very coveted invitation is to be invited to a party at embassy, and these people fall all over themselves in Georgetown and Spring Valley or whatever to have all these foreign officials, coming to their parties and their cocktail hours, and they're never, arrested for Pharah or whatever for dishing to the British embassy.
Nor should they be.
and they're doing real deals in those ones. But anyway, I just want to also put this in context of the importance of understanding what took place here in the first McCarthyism. Because we hear about it, people know about it, but the impact of it on U.S. policy towards Asia and how that ended up in the Vietnam War, around civil rights, around the labor movement. I mean, talk about that if you could, because I think the impact of McCarthyism was so pernicious, but a lot of that has been kind of lost, I think, over the years as the names and the figures and the entities have just sort of faded as time goes on.
Yeah, I think it's a good point because, in high school, if you learn about it at all, it's pretty much you don't get much past the Hollywood 10, which is, of course, an important story about, central cultural figures in the entertainment industry who were blacklisted, who lost their jobs, their careers, and, of course, weren't able to make the sort of contribution to popular culture that they were before, had their lives destroyed and ruined. But beyond the sort of fancy celebrities, and of course they were victims of it, the most prominent victims of it, there's this whole other story which involves really thousands or even tens of thousands of regular working people, peace activists, labor unionists, people who for one reason or another had been basically around the Communist Party or around mass organizations that were connected to the Communist Party, or people who just read the Communist Party newspaper or had been to an event where communists were speaking. Because, of course, in the period right before McCarthyism, the US and the Soviet Union were allied against Nazism. The prestige of the Soviet Union was quite high. There were actually large numbers of people who wanted peace with the Soviet Union, who opposed the Cold War, who said that there could be a sort of a permanent alliance that would safeguard peace for decades to come instead of having a new nuclear arms race, for instance. There's a lot of people who wanted those kinds of politics. And basically, in order to eradicate that stream in US society, there had to be a full court press, a full assault on every sector of society where there was a reserve of sympathy for the Soviet Union or for anti-colonial struggles or for any progressive issue. And so that's why, the whole civil rights movement in its early years was basically cast as a communist plot that was trying to destroy the United States from within. So many other social movements were portrayed the same way. It made it very hard for the people to speak openly. It made it very hard to explore different political ideas, and it really inhibited organizing. And in the long term, it also really destroyed some of the more sane voices in the foreign policy establishment, because the whole concept that initiated that first McCarthyism was who lost China. Now, this question after the Chinese Revolution, it's worth digging into because in a way we're in a moment right now where it's like who lost China part 2. And through the 1940s, they thought that China was going to be in their camp. Then the Chinese Revolution happens and it initiates this frenzy in Washington about who was responsible in Washington, who were the secret communist sympathizers. And according to this domino theory that they had at that moment, basically the top objective of all U.S. foreign policy had to be to prevent the spread of socialism and communism. And basically anybody who called for, normalized relations with these governments or for peace with these governments or hearing what their perspectives were, what was the actual perspective of the people of Vietnam and Korea and China about independence, those people were obviously targeted in the witch hunt. They had to have been under the employ of a foreign power. So that meant any sort of restraining voices on peace, for peace, were eliminated. And that's how you get this rush into the Vietnam War, where even though there were many people who could see where this was going to go, that this was going to become a quagmire, that this was going to cause millions of needless deaths, nobody could say it because your career also would be destroyed, or the people who would have said it were already removed from any sort of positions of influence. And so this sort of McCarthy period that we're in now, which again is sort of mobilized by the same kind of anxiety that the US is losing its grip on the world or has already lost its grip, it's going to have really catastrophic consequences if it's allowed to continue. Because then when the issue comes, when there is that confrontation that's coming probably over Taiwan or over Korea, or over China itself, like over the mainland, who are the voices that are going to say, hey guys, this could be World War III, this could be catastrophe. If we do this, we have no chance of safeguarding peace. We have no chance of stopping climate change. We have so many other things we can't do if we go to war with China. Those voices aren't going to be there because they've already going to have lost their careers or they're going to be afraid.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, if you look at it, the New York Times is at the vanguard of this kind of McCarthyite wave. They're the ones setting the tone for what is acceptable politics right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want just real quick before we let you go, Ben, I do want you to talk a little bit more about the issue of the media's role here. Because like you just mentioned with the New York Times being at the vanguard of this, the mainstream media is playing a massive role in pushing this McCarthyism. And what you have here is a big, massive media outlet that we know is oftentimes a stenographer for the state's foreign policy, attacking smaller independent media as well as activists. Can you talk a little bit just real quick about the role the mainstream media plays in pushing this narrative?
Yeah, I think sometimes they're the stenographers for power, and sometimes I think they're the actual script writers. Because, when you look at like the Libya war, there were actually quite a few restraining voices inside even the military who said this Libya war is going to be a catastrophe. But you had this collaboration between some in the State Department who are heavily interventionist, Hillary Clinton in particular, but a few others, and then the media itself that was saying, if you don't go to war, you're going to be responsible for the next genocide, the next humanitarian catastrophe. Basically pressured Washington, pressured Obama into going to war so that he wouldn't have that sort of as part of his legacy. And so you've actually seen this switch, I think, in recent decades where sometimes the politicians, because they're such creatures of the media themselves, all they care about is the media. How is this going to play on social media for them? So they're actually taking their cues sometimes from the media. And you have the media, which is so deeply integrated with the intelligence services, with the State Department, with the permanent bureaucracy in Washington. Ultimately, we have to remember these are the same people, essentially. There's a revolving door between all of this. And in fact, they go to the same universities, the same Ivy League schools. They have the same pedigree. They're the children of the CEOs. They're married to hedge fund, bankers and the rest of them. They're all integrated. And so, they start getting their narrative going in their own little bubble, and they don't look at the rest of the world. They don't really care what the rest of the world wants. And so it sort of becomes self-fulfilling. And it's unclear sometimes whether the media is driving Washington, whether Washington is driving the media. But the main thing is to understand it as really one class. Never mind the fact that 83% of Nigerians, for instance, have a favorable opinion of China. Never mind that 60-some% of people in Kenya have a favorable opinion of China, want a positive relationship. No, if any news outlet in the United States like Breakthrough or anyone else says it's in China's and Africa's best interest to work together and to oppose this new Cold War, no, now we're echoing Chinese talking points. So, according to this logic, literally hundreds of millions of people, maybe billions of people are echoing Chinese talking points and should be arrested as foreign agents.
Yeah. There's a certain level of racism to it, that's for sure as well, in terms of knowledge production and who's assumed to be able to form their own thoughts and who's being controlled by some sneaky person, which has its own yellow peril racism to it. But nonetheless, that's another topic for another time. Dr. Ben Becker, editor-in-chief of Breakthrough News, great outlet if you don't know about it. Thanks so much for joining us here on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Mm-hmm.
That was a very important segment we just did. And, I don't think it'll be the last, unfortunately, because once the McCarthyism gets started, it doesn't stop.
It's a ball rolling downhill. We'll have to talk about that at another time. We want to go to another very, very important story here. That is ongoing labor organizing in Amazon. And we are honored, I must say, to be joined by Jesse Moreno, who is an Amazon driver and a member of Teamsters Local 396. Jesse, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you guys for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Well, really, really happy to have you. And I think a lot of people actually have seen you guys striking Amazon delivery drivers and dispatchers. You've actually been all over the country picketing Amazon. But, maybe let's just start here. You guys took a big step of going on strike, walking off the job. I mean, what are the types of conditions that you all are forced to deal with there at Amazon that would lead you to take a step and to stand up for your rights in this way?
Well, a lot of it has to do with the working conditions, obviously. Where we drive out of Palmdale, California, so it gets extremely hot out here. The maintenance on our vehicles aren't the best. We have pretty dangerous rural routes, and a lot of this is what we're asking for. Better maintenance on our vehicles is the main thing. We drive around in what feels like ovens. If it's 100 degrees outside, and the back of these vans is 130, 140. Not to mention, issues with mislabeled packages puts us in the back of these vans for another 10, 15 minutes just looking for packages, which, we're dripping sweat, have to step out of the van just to combat that heat by stepping into, a lesser heat outside, which, isn't right. We get chased by dogs, just the way that they have us handle these packages and deliver the packages. They would rather us walk onto the property up to the front door to deliver the package, knowing that there are aggressive animals on the property. But they always tell us, do what you can. We return these packages, and it feels like we're not doing our jobs correctly when we're looking out for ourselves, because they don't want to, essentially look out for us and protect us. Another thing is obviously better pay, benefits, and all around respect. We handle these packages. Without us, they wouldn't be making the profits that they make. So we're demanding respect and better working conditions and benefits.
And what has been the response from Amazon so far?
As of right now, they're still not negotiating. They're still not coming to the table. They're not recognizing the Teamsters they don't want to. They don't want the union in their company, which, they want to keep as much money as possible in their pockets. So that's why we're extending to other states, other facilities, and we're going to continue to do so until Amazon, recognizes a union. They were real quick to putting up all the facility, hiring more staff, bringing corporate out. To kind of into us and keep us on vehicles, which it didn't work. Though out there, we're going to continue to be out there.
I think it's been great to see you guys out there. To see you all around the country has been very cool. I think for the general public, of course, it's exciting to see, this uptick in labor activity, because there are so many people who are, I think, on the job looking for better rights. But talk about the reception you've gotten from other Amazon workers, from the community, as you guys have been traveling the country with your mobile picket lines.
It's been amazing. We're all Amazon employees. We all want the respect that's for. So just to other warehouses, other facilities throughout the nation, they're on board. They want change. They want what we're asking for, and we're going to continue to ask for it. We're going to continue to fight, speak to more drivers, speak to more warehouse staff, and do what we need to get organized. We have other labor efforts with our other Teamster locals in multiple states, multiple cities, and it's just been amazing. Just the social media presence that we have, and having people reach out to us. Oh, can you guys visit our facility? Oh, hit us next. Like, people are excited and people want to see us, and we want to show as much support as possible to them. We might be the ones up in the front, but it doesn't mean that others can't join in. And we don't have a problem with being the face of it if other people are scared, while we go ahead and we do what we need to organize. Amazon's a huge company, and they're going to do what they need to union bust and intimidate. So we're going to be here, and we're going to continue to do what we need to get people to open their eyes and realize, there's powers in numbers. Without us, they wouldn't be making their profits. So it's time to make a stand.
One issue we've also been covering on this program in recent months has been the struggle of UPS workers to negotiate their contract. And so I'm just curious if that has any impact on the ability for Amazon workers to have some more leverage. I mean, I guess when you have another group of workers doing something similar that wins, perhaps I would assume it would impact your ability to be successful.
I mean, yeah, definitely. Our brothers and sisters at UPS, we do the exact same jobs they do. We get some of the routes that they don't get. They get hard routes as well, but we get some that UPS will, refuse to deliver. We don't get that option with Amazon. So they're going to, pick up as many, of the routes as possible to get more money and get us to deliver these packages. So with this negotiation that they just went through and this amazing contract that they have going out and they're voting on, it's been extremely helpful, because it doesn't make sense that a company like Amazon making as much profit that they do, paying us as little as they do. It just doesn't make sense. So the fact that UPS is, they won this negotiation and now they're getting their members to vote on it has been extremely awesome for us. That's what we've been using. I mean, we do the exact same work. We should be getting the exact same pay, benefits, and just respect.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, respect, benefits, pay. I mean, it all seems... it just seems to me whenever I see Amazon delivery drivers out there that they actually don't think of you guys as human. I was actually walking out of my apartment the other day, Sunday morning, like 9 a.m. The brother was out there delivering, and I saw him open the door to the van, and the number of packages was just ungodly. I mean, I just can't even imagine having to deliver those in whatever amount of time there is. And it just seems like what they're asking you to do is the type of thing that it almost feels like you probably have to push your body beyond the limit to do this. I don't know. Talk about that if you could. Maybe I'm wrong, but it just shocked me. And I just thought, wow, this is unbelievable that this one person is being put in this situation.
Yeah, it's ridiculous the amount of packages they throw on us. They recently, in the last, I think, 2 years, they implemented a new way of doing things. So they get what they call group stops. So you drive down one street, you stop at 4 houses, 5 houses on this one street. Amazon calls that one stop, but in reality, it's a group stop. And that's how they get more work out of us, which is essentially, putting a lot of stress on us, on our bodies, especially in this heat. We get, say we, I need to take a bathroom break, or we need for some reason to, jump into a CVS because we need to combat the heat. They start hitting us up. They message out to our dispatch, who message us, why are you guys behind? 10 stops, 15 stops. Well, because I'm not properly equipped to handle this heat with the equipment you guys give me. So I need to do what I have to take care of myself, to make sure I make it home to my family. That's the main thing here. We want to make it home to our families. So the fact that they push us, and during peak season too, it's terrible for our guys. They put way too much on us, and then they go and say that we're not their employees. So they try to push us to the breaking point, which is not right. The subcontracting way of doing things is not right. We don't agree with it, and we need to put an end to that. Because whenever we ask for change or ask for something better, they go and say, well, they're not our employees. They're subcontracted by, this DSP. They need to ask them for, whatever benefits they want. That's not right. We wear their uniforms. We drive their vans. They have the right to fire us without our DSP owners knowing. Like that says a lot.
So I guess can you lay out what is it that Amazon workers are asking for, or drivers are asking for, which I don't think is a lot to ask for. It's what you should be owed as workers. But can you just break that down? Like, what is being asked of Amazon here?
So better pay. I think we are asking for $30, asking for holiday pay, benefits, the right to refuse dangerous stops, which a lot of our guys have to deal with extremely dangerous stops. It's stuff like that our brothers and sisters at UPS have, that we feel we deserve the same thing. We do the exact same jobs, and what we're asking for is extremely fair. And if Amazon, has a certain way of what they feel on what we're asking for, then negotiate, come down to the table, and, time to bargain. I mean, we're not going anywhere anytime soon. So it's time to sit down with us and let's get something figured out, because we're not, like I keep saying, we're not going anywhere anytime soon. And we're going to continue to, make Amazon feel the pressure.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me just ask you this, Jesse, before we let you go. For all of those Amazon drivers, workers, others who are maybe looking at this interview and saying right on to everything you're saying, how can they get in touch with the work you all are doing with the Teamsters to get the rights for Amazon workers that they deserve?
Yeah, definitely reach out. So there are Teamster locals, throughout the nation that you could reach out to your local Teamster, even jump on the Teamster website, fill out a form on there so we could get some information and, start some organizing efforts, at these other facilities. Other than that, if you're out here in the Los Angeles area and you're willing to make the trek out here to Palmdale, join the picket line. We could definitely use some more support. Our guys are out there daily. We're always going to have people out there. We have our community out here supporting as well as us supporting our community. So it's just been amazing the support we've had, the solidarity with other unions and just the community out here. And there's plenty of stuff that you could also do. There's, we're going to continue to be out here and we're going to continue to fight. And our guys obviously need the support, whether it be the morale or, financially. We do have a link going out there where people could donate and help us out. But other than that, showing up to the picket line. And if you're an Amazon worker and you want to start making a change in your facility, reach out, jump on the Teamsters website and fill out that form.
Right on. Well, Jesse Moreno, Amazon driver and member of Teamsters Local 396, we really appreciate you giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you guys for having me. Happy to be back whenever you guys need me. Thank you.
Right on. Thanks so much, man. Really crucial issue. If you're following Breakthrough in LA area, I hope you do find a way to make your way out there. It's been amazing. They've been in, I think, like 11 different states, and everywhere they go, they're having these big picket lines. People are walking out on their breaks to join them. People from the community coming around. And I think with the momentum from what happened at UPS, it's a great time to, put the pressure on Amazon and FedEx too, by the way, it doesn't have a union, to finally, just give people their basic rights on the job, to collectively bargain, to control their conditions. Because some of those conditions, I have to say, horrific.
Oh, yeah. No, what he just described is like completely outrageous, especially for a company as rich as Amazon. I mean,
yeah.
We're talking about
in 2023 to not have AC and have people out working in the heat in the middle. I mean, that is okay. It was 1953. Okay, this is 2023. And Amazon is $1 trillion company. And all I see, Jeff Bezos, ever since he got his little glow up going on, I don't know what he did, body sculpting or whatever. It wasn't just working out, please. Him and his girlfriend, Lorena, whatever her name is, they're on every page 6, blah, blah, blah. This boat, that boat. He got on his little short shorts and da-da-da-da. So you out here on yachts, showing off, doing this, doing that. Billions, trillions of dollars, and your workers who are making it possible for you to take these little vacations are baking in the back of a van. I personally would be ashamed of myself. And, obviously he doesn't care. What does he care? And again, just another example of generational wealth as well, Rania, because people say, oh, he made it on his own. This is a guy who, his father gave him, $110,000 loan, and let him work out of his garage to set up the company. It was like Bill Gates' dad actually spoke to that. And he was like, listen, my son wouldn't be where he was if I hadn't had some level of success, and so on and so forth. So this idea that somehow these people are just making it, is ridiculous. There's some great entrepreneur who just made it. He didn't come up out of the hood, pulling himself up. This is a rich kid from the suburbs who got a big loan from his dad. Please. Are you questioning
meritocracy, Eugene?
I am.
Is that what I'm hearing? I actually recently had somebody, I won't name names, but nobody would know who I was talking about anyways. And I doubt they watch my show. I recently had an argument with somebody in Beirut who was like trying to tell me about meritocracy and how they were going to be the next Mark Zuckerberg. And I was like, does your father have money to give you? Good luck, sir.
Yeah.
But it's amazing. No, but it sadly is amazing, like just how dominant that notion is. But yeah, we have to remind ourselves and everybody else that these people have inherited wealth. They are not rich because they built anything special, or they're not the ones making what they supposedly built even work. It's all these workers who have no AC that are making it function. Furthermore, it really is interesting to me how in the last few months, because it's been the summertime, that's why, that we've been covering so many different labor struggles around the country, whether it's UPS or Amazon just now, or what's it called? The diner workers.
Waffle
I'm
House.
sorry. What's the name? Thank you. Waffle House workers.
So let me just interject. This is 100% proving that you are not really from Virginia. That is it right there. I want y'all to clip that. I want you to put that down. I want someone to emblazon this as a clip. She could not remember the name of Waffle House. No true Virginian would ever forget Waffle House. That's it.
I have lived
it's
in the
done.
Middle East for the last 6 years.
It doesn't matter.
Okay?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The last 6 years, you lived for 21 years in Northern Virginia. No, this is it. Thank you. Thank you, Waffle House.
I'm not even going to entertain. I am not. Come on, man. I'm not even going to entertain this. That is not true. I am 100% born and raised in Virginia, and Eugene is spreading misinformation, disinformation. Stop with the. Can I make the point I was going to make before
Please
you
go right ahead.
Rudely interrupted to lie to our audience about my origins? What I was trying to say is it's amazing that these multi-billion-dollar companies that are making all of these, people rich and able to buy so many yachts are incapable of, this has been an ongoing theme, is no AC. Whether we're talking about Waffle House, whether we're talking about UPS, whether we're talking about Amazon, it's incredible. One thing after another. And it's like, as the world heats up even more with record temperatures, something tells me that this is going to be an ongoing theme, is like workers having to push back against the idea of like dying of a heat stroke on the job.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I just briefly looked this up, so don't fully quote me, but this is from Yahoo, that as of June 30th of this year, Amazon had $5 billion in free cash flow. That's one of those Wall Street words, but free cash flow basically means like money they can spend on anything if they so chose. Like, this is just money after everything they know they need to do, they have to do other things. So $5 billion. And I don't think these drivers are even making $20, at least at this Palmdale facility. And it just gives you $20 an hour. And it just gives you a sense of how miserly it's like a Scrooge economy over here. But that's, I think, sadly, the name of the game in capitalism is the bosses want to maximize their profit and the workers want to just basically survive. And the only way they can basically survive in a profit maximization system is to band together and to organize a union. And that's why all these companies, Starbucks, all of them, Starbucks had a big action earlier this week of workers out there. They're still fighting, still pushing. Why they don't want to recognize unions, why they violate the law. As we know, all of these companies have routinely and rampantly violated the law. So we shall see, auto workers gearing up for a big contract struggle as well. So a lot of different things that are out there on the labor front, so to speak, but we'll have to bring you those in later shows, Rania. I think this more or less brings us to the end of this show. Anything you want to leave our audience with?
I do. I just want to remind everybody to please make sure you hit that like button. It helps us in the algorithm. And also I want to remind people that you can support this show and all of our other excellent work going on at Breakthrough News by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News, becoming a patron if you are able to. And you can also access exclusive content, including Eugene's monthly seminar on Africa, portions of my show dispatches that only members get. And then also you get some cool merch, including the very cool, Eugene, here we go, do your Vanna White, very cool mug that I'm still very jealous I don't have. I'm going to have to get a mug because I think it looks awesome, matches our new look here at Breakthrough on the freedom side. So yes, please do become a patron at patreon.com/Breakthrough News.
And shout out to F. Lou, who donated £5. Thanks for staying up late for the show as well. Maybe you're working early or overnight, but either way, shout out to you. Shout out to everybody who helps make this show possible in our Breakthrough News team, all our listeners, all our viewers, all our patrons. Really, really appreciate you all. And for myself, for Rania Khalek, we will see you next time on the Freedom Side.
Revolution knows no compromise. Revolution overturns and destroys everything that gets